The rain in Ravenport, Illinois, isn't the romantic kind you see in movies. It's a miserable, persistent drizzle that slicks the asphalt with an oily sheen and turns the air heavy with the smell of wet concrete and the nearby, brackish water of the port. It's the kind of rain that seeps into your bones and reminds you of every bad decision you've ever made. Tonight, it was my unwelcome companion. I was huddled inside the spin cycle, a 24-hour laundromat that served as a fluorescent-lit purgatory for the city's night owls, and the recently unfortunate, I fell squarely into the latter category. My job as a night shift veterinary tech, the one thing that gave my life a semblance of purpose, had been declared redundant 3 days ago. Budget cuts, they'd said. My boss, Dr. Albright, had the decency to look ashamed when he handed me my last paycheck. But shame doesn't pay rent. The rhythmic thumping of my last set of scrubs tumbling in the industrial dryer was the only sound besides the rain and the low, migraine-inducing hum of the overhead lights. I leaned my forehead against the cool, damp glass of the front window, my breath fogging a small circle on the pane. Outside, the neon sign of the laundromat bled red and blue onto the wet pavement. My reflection was a pale, tired ghost staring back at me, dark circles under my eyes, short brown hair plastered to my scalp from the damp, and a defiant set to my jaw that felt like the only thing holding me together. A whisper escaped my lips, meant for no one but that ghost in the glass. Make him regret losing me. I wasn't sure which him I meant. Was it Kevin, who decided my dedication to saving sick animals was less appealing than a paralegal with a 401k? Or was it Dr. Albright, who had cut the one person who could calm a feral cat with just a murmur and a slow blink? Maybe it was both. Maybe it was the whole damn world. A heavy burden to carry alone. The voice was low and smooth, like aged whiskey, and it came from the corner of the room. I jolted, my heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't even registered him sitting there. He was just a shadow in a dark raincoat, slumped in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, a large duffel bag at his feet. There was a stillness about him that was unnerving, the kind of quiet that took up all the air in a room. I straightened up, wrapping my arms around myself. I wasn't talking to you. He didn't seem offended. He just watched me with eyes that were dark and hard to read in the flickering light. They looked ancient. I know. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a venomous, insistent vibration. I didn't need to look at the caller ID. Mr. Gable, my landlord, a greasy weasel of a man who worked for Harborline Holding, the faceless corporation that owned half the rundown apartment buildings in this part of town. I turned my back to the stranger, pressing the phone to my ear. Tamsin, my dear, Gable's voice oozed with false pleasantry. Just calling to see if you've reconsidered your position. My position is that charging tenants for emergency maintenance to fix a pipe that's been leaking for 6 months is illegal, and I reported it to the city. That hasn't changed. Principles, a luxury item. Wouldn't you agree? Especially when one is behind on rent. He paused for effect. The eviction notice gives you 24 hours, but for you, I could be persuaded to misplace the paperwork if, say, the complaint to the city were to be retracted. I'll have the money. I lied, my stomach twisting into a knot. My last paycheck had barely covered my groceries and the cost of doing this final load of laundry. I'm sure you will, he said, the sneer audible in his tone. Clock is ticking. Tamsin, he hung up. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the burn of helpless tears. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over the name Sarah, my older sister, my last resort. I took a deep breath and called, Tamsin, is everything okay? It's late. Hey, Sarah, sorry to bother you. Listen, I have a huge favor to ask. I'm in a bit of a jam with my apartment, and I was wondering if I could maybe crash on your couch for a few days, just until I get things sorted out. The silence on the other end stretched for an eternity. I could hear her husband, Mark, murmuring in the background. Mark, who viewed me as a walking collection of bad luck and poor life choices. "Oh, Tam," she finally said, her voice strained. "You know we would, but Mark's got that big project at work, and he's really stressed, and with the kids, it's just not a good time." "It's never a good time, is it?" The bitterness slipped out before I could stop it. "Don't be like that. I'll send you a little money. Okay, to help out." "I don't want your money. Sarah, I just needed a place to sleep." I ended the call before she could offer any more placating lies. My throat tight. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck, knowing the quiet man in the corner had likely heard every pathetic word. The world had shrunk to the size of this laundromat, and it was closing in on me. As if summoned by my despair, the glass door creaked open, letting in a gust of damp, cold air. A man stepped inside, shaking water from a cheap leather jacket. It was built like a refrigerator, with a thick neck and a face that looked like it had been on the losing end of a few arguments. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me, a predator's gaze. I recognized him. He was one of Gable's unofficial enforcers, the kind of guy Harbor Line sent when they wanted to turn up the pressure. He sauntered over, his boots squeaking on the linoleum. He smelled of stale cigarettes and aggression. "Row," he grunted, stopping a little too close for comfort. "Mister, Gable's getting impatient. He doesn't like it when his tenants get ideas." "I've already spoken to him," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Yeah, but sometimes a message needs a personal touch." He took another step, backing me against the humming dryer. "It would be a shame if a pretty girl like you had to find a new place to live on such short notice. A real shame if all your things ended up on the sidewalk, in the rain." My blood ran cold. I opened my mouth to tell him to get lost, but the words wouldn't come. My eyes darted around the empty laundromat, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Then, they landed on the man in the corner. He hadn't moved. He was still sitting there, watching. But something had changed. The casual slouch was gone. He was perfectly still, his attention fixed on the enforcer. He slowly lifted his gaze from the floor and met the other man's eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. I saw the enforcer flinch, as if he'd been struck. The confident smirk on his face dissolved into a flicker of panic. He took a half-step back, his bravado evaporating like steam. He looked from the quiet man to me and back again, his mind clearly struggling to process what was happening. Then, with a muttered curse, he turned on his heel and practically fled from the laundromat, disappearing into the rainy night. I stared at the door he'd left swinging, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then I turned to the stranger, my fear quickly replaced by suspicion. He hadn't saved me. He had just revealed himself as a bigger predator than the one who had just left. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling slightly. He finally stood up, unfolding to a height that was even more imposing than I'd realized. "Just someone who hates bullies." His answer was smooth, simple, and told me absolutely nothing. "And how did you do that? What did you say to him?" "Sometimes, you don't have to say anything at all." He picked up his duffel bag. It looked heavy. Inside, I could see the edge of a dark, expensive-looking suit jacket, marred by a dark, wet stain near the lapel, red. My mind flashed to every crime show I'd ever seen. Just then, a Ravenport Municipal Patrol car cruised slowly down the street. Hope, sharp and desperate, surged through me. I rushed to the window, waving my arm. "Hey, officer, I need some help." The car slowed. I saw the officer in the passenger seat look directly at me, his face impassive. For a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to stop. Then, his eyes flicked past me, to the man standing behind me. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift happened in the officer's expression. He looked away, said something to the driver, and the car accelerated, its red and blue lights silent as it continued down the block and vanished. The hope inside me died, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. This man wasn't just dangerous. He was the kind of dangerous the cops looked away from. His phone buzzed, a different, more discreet sound than my own. He answered, his voice dropping even lower. "Navarre." "What?" "Pier 3. How much? Sable Crown is getting bold. Secure the perimeter. I'm on my way." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. His calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a chilling focus. He was about to leave, but he paused, his dark eyes landing on me once more. He reached into his coat, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was pulling out a weapon. Instead, his hand emerged with a small, rectangular business card. He stepped forward and placed it on top of my laundry machine. "Behind this place," he said, his voice back to that smooth, low timbre, "there's a restaurant, the Peregrine Deli, if you need a warm meal." He turned and walked out the door without a backward glance, melting into the rain as quickly as the enforcer had. I was left alone in the deafening silence, the thumping of the dryer having finally ceased. My body trembled with leftover adrenaline. I looked down at the card. It was simple. Thick cardstock with just a name and an address, Peregrine Deli, no phone number. My pride screamed at me to throw it away. I didn't take charity from strange, terrifying men who scared off thugs and cops with a single glance. I wasn't that desperate. But then my stomach rumbled, a loud, aching protest. I was that desperate. I gathered my warm, clean scrubs, the scent of fabric softener, a ridiculously normal smell in a world that had just been tilted on its axis. As I stood by the door, ready to face the rain and a night spent on the streets, I glanced down. My soaked sneakers were next to a puddle that had formed on the cracked linoleum. In its murky surface, the laundromat's neon sign was reflected, a distorted, bleeding mess of red and blue. It felt fitting. My world, a safe but crumbling place, had just collided with another, one that was dark, violent, and powerful, and I was standing right at the point of impact. I spent the night curled in one of the hard plastic chairs at the spin cycle, my freshly washed scrubs serving as a pillow. Sleep was a restless, fitful thing, punctuated by the shadows of passing cars and the constant, nagging fear of what the morning would bring. When the first gray light-in of dawn filtered through the grimy window, I forced my aching body to move. Every joint protested. I felt like I'd aged a decade in a single night. The walk back to my apartment building was a walk of shame. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with a damp chill that promised more to come. I rounded the corner to my street and saw it immediately. A heavy, industrial-grade padlock and a thick metal hasp had been bolted to the outside of my door. A bright orange sticker was slapped over the lock, the Harbor Line Holding logo stark against the peeling paint. Illegally occupied premises, no trespassing. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through me, momentarily eclipsing the despair. They hadn't even waited for the 24 hours to be up. They'd just locked me out. My entire life was behind that door. My books, my clothes, and most importantly, my veterinary kit, the collection of specialized tools I'd painstakingly acquired over the years. My suture kits, my diagnostic tools, my well-worn medical texts, they were my future. And Gable had sealed them away. After a futile, shoulder-bruising attempt to break the lock and a screaming match with Harbor Line's automated phone system, I was left standing on the sidewalk, defeated. I had the clothes on my back, a nearly dead phone, and the business card for the Peregrine Deli weighing down my pocket. My stomach growled, a hollow, empty sound. Pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. I wasn't going for a meal, I told myself. I was going for the free Wi-Fi. I had to find a new job, and I had to do it now. The deli was tucked into an alleyway behind the laundromat, a hidden gem with a green striped awning and the comforting smell of roasting coffee and baking bread wafting from its door, inside. It was warm and clean, a stark contrast to the city's grim exterior. The place was bustling, but not with typical breakfast customers. A group of people in practical work clothes and jackets bearing the logo of a soaring bird and the words Arcturus Foundation were gathered around a large table, and standing at the head of it, directing the placement of large aluminum trays of food, was the man from the laundromat, Mateo Navar. He looked different in the daylight, less of a phantom, more of a man. He'd shed the dark raincoat for a simple, well-fitted gray sweater and dark jeans. He wasn't overtly muscular, but he moved with a quiet economy of motion that spoke of contained power. He looked up as the bell on the door chimed, and his dark eyes met mine. There was a flicker of recognition, but no surprise. It was as if he'd been expecting me. I ignored him, marching straight to the counter and ordering the cheapest coffee on the menu from a friendly woman with a kind smile. I found a small, two-person booth in the corner, pulled out my laptop, and logged onto their network. I immediately pulled up a job search site and my resume. The cursor blinked mockingly on the screen. Tamsin Rowe, experienced veterinary technician, proficient in emergency triage, surgical assistance, and compassionate care. It felt like a lifetime ago. I was so engrossed in crafting a cover letter that I didn't notice him approach until his shadow fell over my table. "Bad morning," he asked, his voice that same low rumble from the night before. I looked up. My guard instantly raised. He was holding 2 plates, each with a steaming bagel piled high with eggs and cheese. He placed one in front of me. "I'm not looking for charity," I said, pushing the plate back toward him. "It's not charity. It's a transaction. You eat, I ask you a few questions." He sat down opposite me without waiting for an invitation, taking a bite of his own bagel. He chewed thoughtfully, watching me. My stomach betrayed me with another loud growl. Defeated. I pulled the plate back and took a ravenous bite. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. "You're a vet tech," he stated, not a question, and he was looking at my laptop screen. I swallowed, forcing myself to chew slowly. I got laid off. "Skills." "What?" "Your skills. What are they?" He was direct, his gaze intense. It felt less like a conversation and more like an interrogation. "I can place an IV catheter in a dehydrated kitten. I can calculate drug dosages in my head. I can tell the difference between a seizure and a syncopal episode from across the room. I lifted my chin, and I can suture a laceration on a scared dog in under 5 minutes. A flicker of something interest, maybe respect, crossed his face. 3, if it's on the back, I added, unable to resist. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The Arcturus Foundation, the people you see over there, is one of my philanthropic projects. We run a street animal rescue station a few blocks from here. It's understaffed. Our lead tech just went on maternity leave. It's temporary work. The pay is good. Are you interested? My mind reeled. A job, a real job, doing what I loved. It was a lifeline thrown from the most unexpected and most dangerous of ships. Every instinct screamed at me to run. This man was tied to whatever darkness stalked the streets of Ravenport, but the image of the padlock on my door, of my sealed-away future, was sharper. I needed the money. I needed the work. "Why me?" I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. "Because you're desperate. You're qualified, and you're right here," he said with brutal honesty. "And because I have a feeling you don't give up easily." He slid a piece of paper across the table. An address. "Marae Ibis runs the station. She's expecting you. Start today." And just like that, he stood up and walked away, rejoining the group at the large table, leaving me with a half-eaten bagel and a job offer that felt both like a miracle and a trap. I told myself it was just a job. I would go in, do the work, get paid, and stay as far away from Mateo Navar as humanly possible. The Arcturus Rescue Station was an oasis in the urban desert. It was a clean, well-lit facility carved out of an old warehouse, filled with the sounds of soft whimpers and contented purrs. A woman with a warm, no-nonsense face and hair in a tight bun introduced herself as Marae. She didn't ask any questions about where I'd come from. She just handed me a set of clean scrubs and pointed me toward the kennels. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of purpose. I was needed here. Mateo, as promised, kept his distance. He'd brought the food, spoken briefly with Marae, and left, but I felt his presence long after he was gone. It lingered in the efficiency of the facility, the quality of the supplies, the quiet gratitude in Marae's eyes. My skills came back to me as if they'd never left. I changed dressings, administered medications, and cleaned cages. The physical work was a balm to my frayed nerves. Late in the afternoon, a police officer brought in a pit bull that had been found chained in a vacant lot. The dog was terrified, a cowering, trembling mass of muscle and fear, snarling at anyone who came near. "He's a lost cause," the officer said, shaking his head. "Probably have to put him down." "No," I said, my voice firm. "Give me a minute." I approached the cage slowly, not making eye contact. I sat on the floor, a few feet away, and just talked to him in a low, soothing voice. I told him he was a good boy, that he was safe, that no one was going to hurt him. I didn't try to touch him. I just sat there, a quiet, non-threatening presence. After 10 long minutes, the snarling subsided into a low growl, then a whimper. He crawled to the front of the cage and cautiously licked my outstretched fingers. I didn't know that Mateo had returned. I didn't see him standing in the doorway of the intake room, watching the entire exchange. Murray told me later that he didn't say a word, just watched me with an unreadable expression before turning and leaving as silently as he'd arrived. That evening, as I was preparing to spend a second night at the laundromat, a sleek black car pulled up beside me. The tinted window slid down, revealing a man with a severe face and the build of a career soldier. "Mr. Navarre sent me. I'm Rook Salazar. I'm to ensure you have a safe place to stay." He gestured to a clean, respectable-looking extended-stay hotel across the street. "A room has been arranged for you. It's prepaid for the week." Before I could protest, before I could voice my outrage at this intrusion, he said, "It's not a request. Ravenport isn't safe for you right now." The finality in his tone left no room for argument. Later that night, unable to sleep in the crisp, anonymous sheets of the hotel bed, I found myself scrolling through local news articles. A small piece caught my eye. Declan Voss, the billionaire CEO of a tech logistics startup called Obsidian Meridian, was rumored to be making a major real estate play in the Port District. He was known for his ruthless tactics, and a grainy photo accompanying the article showed him shaking hands with a man I recognized instantly, a smirking, greasy man in a cheap suit, Mr. Gable, my landlord. Suddenly, a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. A few days ago, frustrated by the decay and neglect of my apartment building, I'd been taking pictures of the cracked foundations and water damage to send with my complaint to the city. As I'd been snapping a photo, a black SUV had pulled up, and a group of men in sharp suits had gotten out to survey the property. Annoyed, I'd taken a picture of their car, capturing the license plate as evidence of the kind of money that owned the building but refused to fix it. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Now, I wondered who those men were. I didn't know that miles away. In a darkened office overlooking the rain-swept port, Mateo Navarre was looking at a still frame from a security camera. The image showed me, Tamsin Row standing on the sidewalk, my phone aimed directly at the license plate of a black SUV belonging to Declan Voss, and he was giving a quiet order to the man named Rook, an order to protect me, an order that I was not to know about. The only thing I knew for sure was that my life had become impossibly complicated, and as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, my last conscious thought was of a small boy I'd seen outside the deli that morning, his shoelace untied. I'd knelt down, without thinking, and tied it for him, showing him how to make the loops into bunny ears. It was a small, simple act of kindness in a world that felt increasingly harsh, and I couldn't have possibly known that from across the street. A man who dealt in shadows had watched that small gesture, his hand pausing on his car door, his expression, for just a fleeting moment, softening. The week-long stay at the Hotel Mr. Navarre had arranged felt like a gilded cage. It was clean, anonymous, and safe, but it wasn't mine. I threw myself into the work at the Arcturus station, taking double shifts, my hands finding comfort in the familiar tasks of healing, the cuts, the infections, the matted fur. These were problems I understood, problems I could fix. They were a welcome distraction from the man who had provided this temporary solution. Matteo Navar. I hadn't seen him since that first day at the deli, but his presence was a low hum beneath everything at the station, from the top-shelf antibiotics in the cabinet to the quiet efficiency of Murray Ibis. I was walking back from a late shift, choosing the longer route along the river to clear my head. The air was crisp, smelling of damp pavement and the distant, briny scent of the port. The hotel was only a few blocks away when I felt it, the unmistakable prickle on the back of my neck, the sense of being watched. I slowed my pace, my hand tightening on the strap of my bag. I glanced at the reflection in a dark storefront window, a man, walking about half a block behind me, nondescript, jeans, dark hoodie, baseball cap pulled low. When I crossed the street, he crossed too. My heart kicked into a frantic rhythm. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. I remembered the cops at the laundromat, their indifferent eyes sliding past me to Matteo. Calling 911 felt like a useless gesture. I turned the corner onto the side street where the hotel entrance was, a stretch of road that was darker, lined with dumpsters from the neighboring restaurants. The footsteps behind me quickened, closing the distance. I broke into a run. Suddenly, a man in a sharp suit stepped out of a recessed doorway directly in front of me. I cried out, stumbling back. He immediately raised his hands, a phone pressed to his ear. "Damn it," he barked, not at me, but at the phone. He looked flustered. "Sorry, Miss Clumsy. Dropped my connection." He jabbed at the screen of his phone, blocking my path, then fumbled, and the device slipped from his grasp, skittering across the sidewalk at my feet. "Ah, hell," he muttered, bending to retrieve it. Behind me. The running footsteps stopped abruptly. I heard a muffled curse, then the sound of them retreating rapidly in the direction we'd come. The man in the suit straightened up, wiping his phone on his pants. He looked at me, his severe face completely calm. It was Rook Salazar, the man who had driven me to the hotel. The dropped phone was a complete fabrication. He'd been waiting for me. He'd been watching me, and he had been watching my pursuer. My fear instantly curdled into a cold, sharp anger. This wasn't safety. This was a leash. "Tell your boss," I said, my voice trembling with rage, "to call off his dogs, all of them." Rook didn't apologize. He didn't even blink. He simply inclined his head. "Mr. Navar is at the station. He's waiting for you." I didn't go to the hotel. I spun on my heel and stormed the 5 blocks back to the Arcturus station. My mind a wildfire of indignation. This was control, plain and simple. I burst through the front door, making the bell jangle violently. Murray, who was wiping down the front counter, looked up in alarm. "Tamsin, did you forget something?" "Where is he?" I demanded. Matteo's voice came from the doorway to the back kennels before Murray could answer. "In my office." "It's fine. Murray, you can head home." Murray gave me a worried look, then gathered her things and slipped out, locking the front door behind her. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed in the suddenly silent room, leaving just me, Matteo, and the soft sounds of sleeping animals. He was wearing dark slacks and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing strong forearms. He looked more like a CEO than a mob boss, or maybe they were the same thing. "You had me followed," I accused, marching up to him. I was so angry I was shaking. "You had your man shadow me, and then you had another man shadow him. What am I to you, a lost puppy you get to tag and collar?" He didn't back down. He just watched me, his gaze steady. "The man following you was not one of mine. He was one of Declan Voss's." The name hit me like a splash of cold water. Voss, the tech billionaire from the news, the man shaking hands with my landlord, Gable. What does he want with me? "You took his picture," Matteo said simply. "Or at least you took a picture of his license plate outside your apartment building. In his world, that makes you a loose end, a potential witness." My blood ran cold. The photo on my phone, the picture I'd taken out of pure spite. "So this is what you're protecting your investment," I snapped, my fear making me lash out. The new vet tech for your charity front. I don't want your protection. Mr. Navarre, I don't want to be a part of whatever this is. This is Ravenport, Tamsin, he said, his voice dropping to that low, intense level that silenced the room. It's not safe. Not for anyone, but especially not for you right now. He took a step closer. I held my ground, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I don't owe you anything, I whispered, though my bravado was fading. No, he said, his eyes searching mine, as if looking for something he'd lost. I owe you. I blinked, confused. Owe me for what? The job? The hotel room I didn't ask for? For what you said at the laundromat? The air left my lungs, and he had been listening. Every pathetic, whispered word. Make him regret losing me, he quoted, his voice a soft murmur. The fluorescent lights of the clinic hummed in the silence. You said the words I've been carrying, unspoken, for a decade. You gave them a voice. I owed you for that. My anger evaporated, replaced by a profound, trembling vulnerability. I felt completely, utterly exposed. I said that for myself, I managed to say, my throat tight. He looked at me, and the unreadable, dangerous mask he wore shifted. For a second, I saw the man beneath someone marked by a loss so deep it had become a part of his foundation. And I heard it, he replied, his voice barely audible. For both of us. The next few days were a blur. I buried myself in the work, and Mateo, for his part, kept his distance. But I was aware of him. I was aware of Rook Salazar's car parked a block away when I left the station. I was aware of the subtle shift in the city around me. Then, he summoned me. A simple text, Peregrine Deli, noon. We need to talk. When I arrived, the deli was in its midday lull. Mateo was in a back booth, but he wasn't alone. A man in a rumpled suit sat across from him, a government-issue badge clipped to his belt. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but his eyes were sharp. Tamsin, Mateo said, gesturing for me to slide in beside him. It was a command. I sat, feeling trapped. This is Agent Vol, Mateo said, FDES, Federal Directorate of Economic Security. Agent Vol nodded at me, his gaze analytical. Miss Rowe, the woman with the camera. Agent Vol is building a case against Declan Voss, Mateo explained, his voice all business. Obsidian Meridian is a front for a massive data and money laundering operation. He wants my cooperation. What we want, Vol corrected, his voice raspy, is your network. Navarre, Voss is using Harbor Line, holding your old playmates to buy up the waterfront. He's pushing out the tenants to build a new data hub. My building, I breathed. Exactly, Vol said. Voss is moving fast. We need an inside track. Navarre gives us that in exchange. The FDA is willing to look favorably on formalizing his consortium's legitimate logistics contracts. Mateo leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. I want something else. I want the Pier Line complex, your apartment building, Tamsin and the surrounding blocks placed in protective receivership. I want the eviction orders frozen permanently. And I want the properties turned over to a community land trust. Vol let out a short, dry laugh. Since when are you a champion of the people, Navarre, a mafia boss with a heart? Mateo's eyes went cold. It was a visible, physical change, like a lake freezing over. I have one, he said, his voice flat, but it's mostly scar tissue. You want Voss. You save my neighborhood. That's the price of admission. Vol stared at him for a long moment, the humor draining from his face. I'll see what I can do. 2 days later, I was cleaning a suture line on a retriever when Murray told me Mateo wanted to see me. He was standing outside the clinic, next to his black car. Gable's here, he said, not as a warning, but as a statement of fact. We walked to the deli. My former landlord, Mr. Gable, was sitting in the same booth Agent Vol had occupied, looking sweaty and nervous. Mateo didn't sit. He stood over the table, a shadow of pure intimidation. The 30-day eviction notices you posted are null and void, Mateo said. Now, see here, Navarre, Gable blustered. Harbor Line has new partners, and they are very keen on expediting the I don't care about your partners. Mateo cut him off. "I've spoken with Agent Vol at the FDS. They are prepared to freeze every asset Harborline owns, pending their investigation into Declan Voss, but that's a slow process. I'm offering you a faster one." He slid a document across the table. "This is a 30-day stay on all evictions at Pierline, a gesture of goodwill. You sign it, and perhaps I can persuade Agent Vol that you are a cooperating witness, not a co-conspirator." Gable's face went pale. He knew he was trapped. He looked at Mateo, then at the document. He snatched a pen from his pocket, his hand shaking, and scribbled a signature. He was out of the deli 30 seconds later. I was breathless. He'd done it. He'd saved my home. He'd saved my neighbors. "That's 30 days, I said, the relief warring with the terror of what I'd just witnessed. "It's a start, Trotter," he said, finally sitting down. "It's a little time." That night, he found me as I was locking up the station. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a question. We walked in silence, away from the hotel, away from the port, toward one of the older, taller apartment buildings that stood half empty, a relic of a bygone era. He used a key to open the heavy service door, and we climbed flight after flight of dusty concrete stairs. The air grew cooler, the sounds of the city fading to a distant hum. He pushed open a heavy metal door, and we stepped out onto the roof. I gasped. The entire city of Ravenport was spread out before us, a glittering tapestry of light and shadow. But the view wasn't the most incredible part. The rooftop was a garden, not a manicured, perfect garden, but a wild, functional one, with crates of herbs and tomato plants, and in the center, lined up against the far wall, were 4 large, beautifully crafted wooden boxes. "You're a beekeeper," I whispered. Stepping closer, a low, gentle buzzing filled the air. "They're orderly," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. He was watching the bees, not the city. "They have a queen. They have a purpose. They take the chaos of the city and they make something structured, something sweet. It calms my mind." We stood there for a long time, the cool night air pulling the stress from my shoulders. It was the first truly quiet moment I'd had in weeks. A single bee, confused by the night air, landed on the collar of Mateo's dark jacket, perilously close to the skin of his neck. My instincts took over. "Hold still," I murmured. I reached out, my fingers gently, deftly brushing his collar to cup the bee. My fingertips grazed the warm skin of his neck. He flinched. It wasn't a retreat. It was a sharp, sudden intake of breath, a tightening of his entire body, as if he'd received an electric shock. It was the reaction of a man who was never, ever, touched unexpectedly. I held the bee in my palm, feeling its tiny, vibrating legs, and placed it on the edge of the nearest hive, where it crawled inside. When I turned back, Mateo was watching me, his expression intense, his dark eyes fixed on my face. "Whoever it was," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. "The one who made you say those words at the laundromat, the one who let you go." He took a half step closer. We were standing in a small circle of light from the stairwell door, surrounded by the sleeping city and the humming hives. "He will regret it," he said. He looked down at my hand, the one that had touched him, then back up to my eyes. "If it were me," he whispered, "I would never leave." The words hung in the air, a promise and a threat, a weight I wasn't prepared to carry. It was too much. The violence, the feds, the manipulation, and now this devastating, terrifying tenderness. I took a step back, breaking the invisible thread that held us. The air rushed back into my lungs. "I should go," I said, my voice shaky. I have an early shift tomorrow." He didn't try to stop me. The mask of the impassive boss slid perfectly back into place. "Rook is waiting downstairs. He'll see you back." I turned and fled, walking quickly back to the stairwell door, but as I pulled it open, I couldn't resist one last look. He hadn't moved. He was still standing by his hives, a solitary king watching over his chaotic, glittering city. My mind screamed at me to run, to pack my few belongings and disappear. But my heart, my stupid, treacherous, and deeply confused heart, was already, hopelessly, beginning to waver. The 30-day reprieve Matteo had wrenched from Harborline felt less like a ceasefire and more like the tense quiet between lightning and thunder. The clock was ticking, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. The residents of Pierline looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear, as if I were some kind of reluctant savior. I wasn't. I was just a vet tech who had stumbled into the orbit of a very dangerous star. Matteo summoned me to the back room of the Peregrine Deli 2 days after his confrontation with Gable. The space, which I'd assumed was just a kitchen, had been transformed into a makeshift command center. Blueprints were spread across a large stainless steel table, and Rook Salazar stood watch by the door, his arm in a clean, professionally wrapped bandage from some previous incident I didn't want to know about. Matteo stood over the table, his focus absolute. He pointed to a section of the blueprints, a detailed schematic of a large, windowless building on the industrial waterfront. Dry Dock 19, he said, his voice clipped and precise. It's a commercial cold storage facility, fruits, vegetables, pharmaceuticals, and, as of last week, one very important hard drive. He looked at me, his dark eyes pinning me in place. Voss is smarter than to keep his real business records in his office. He's hidden the server that logs every transaction for Obsidian Meridian's shadow operations inside a climate-controlled locker at Dry Dock 19. He calls it the Atlas node. According to Agent Vol's intelligence, it's the key to everything: the money laundering, the shell corporations, the illegal data brokering. If we get it, we don't just stop the evictions, we end Voss. I stared at the complex web of lines and symbols on the blueprint. You're going to steal it. It wasn't a question. We are, he corrected me softly. This isn't my world, Tamsin. I don't know the first thing about high-tech security. And I do? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. The facility is protected by a network of thermal sensors, he explained, ignoring my sarcasm. Breach a door, cut a wire, and the slightest change in temperature will trigger an alarm that brings the entire Ravenport PD down on the place in under 90 seconds. Vol can't get a warrant on a hunch, so a frontal assault is out. We have to get in and out without anyone knowing we were there. But my team can't find a blind spot. I leaned closer, my curiosity overriding my fear. My eyes scanned the schematics, and a flicker of recognition sparked in my mind. The intricate network of ducts, compressors, and coolant lines was a mess to a layman. But to me, this looks like the industrial HVAC system for the cryogenics lab at the University Vet Hospital, I murmured, mostly to myself. I had spent a summer internship helping the maintenance crew troubleshoot that exact system. My finger traced a thick, insulated line that snaked from the main compressor unit to an exterior wall. This is the primary coolant exhaust conduit, I said, my voice gaining confidence. It vents supercooled air and condensation runoff. The area around its external port will be a thermal dead zone. The sensors are programmed to ignore it because its temperature fluctuates constantly. If your team can get through that port, they'll be inside the main ventilation shaft, completely invisible to the thermal grid. Matteo and Rook exchanged a look. It was a brief, almost imperceptible glance, but it was filled with a new kind of respect. The quiet vet tech had just given them their key. You'll monitor the thermal grid from a van across the street, Asia Matteo said, his voice leaving no room for argument. You'll be our eyes. You tell us if anything changes. The night of the operation was cold and moonless. I sat in the back of a nondescript plumbing van, the glow of a laptop screen illuminating my tense face. The screen displayed a live feed of the Dry Dock 19 thermal grid, a schematic of the building glowing in shades of blue, green, and yellow. I wore a headset, listening to the quiet, clipped chatter of Rook and his 3-man team, the Peregrine 4, as I'd heard Matteo call them. Peregrine 1 to Ias. Rook's voice crackled in my ear, using our designated call signs. We're at the exhaust port. It's clear. AS to Peregrine 1, I responded, my voice tight. Thermal grid is stable. You are a go. You have a 12-minute window before the next compressor cycle. I watched as 4 small, blue heat signatures disappeared from the exterior of the building and reappeared inside the main ventilation shaft, just as I'd predicted. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was an accomplice to a major felony. I was helping a mob boss steal from a tech billionaire. My life had taken a turn I couldn't possibly have imagined a week ago. Moving to Sector Gamma, Rook reported, Atlas node is in Locker 7B. Grid is still cold, I confirmed, my eyes glued to the screen. Then, everything went wrong. A sudden flash of angry orange appeared on my screen at the north end of the building. Not 1 heat signature, but 5. Peregrine 1, you have company, I hissed into the mic. 5 hostiles, north access corridor. Moving fast, they're not on the facility's security roster. Sable Crown. Rook's voice was a low curse. It's an ambush. AS, get out of there. No, get the node. I heard Mateo's voice cut in on a separate channel, sharp and commanding. He was somewhere nearby, listening to everything. The next 30 seconds were a chaotic mess of static, muffled shouts, and the sickeningly sharp crack of suppressed gunfire. Then, a pained grunt crackled over the headset. Rook's hit, one of the team members yelled. My blood ran cold. The plan, the mission, Mateo's orders, they all vanished. All I could hear was that sound of pain. All I could think was someone is hurt, someone is bleeding. I'm coming in, I said, already shrugging off the headset and grabbing the veterinary first aid kit I never went anywhere without. Tamsin, no. Mateo's voice was a roar in the discarded earpiece. That is a direct order. You stay in the van. I was already out the door and sprinting across the dark, empty street. My mind was clear. My purpose singular. I wasn't ES. I was Tamsin Rowe, vet tech, and a member of my team was down. The exhaust port was small, but I was smaller. I squeezed through, the cold metal scraping my jacket, and dropped into the dark, cavernous ventilation shaft. I followed the sounds of the fight, my small maglite cutting a path through the darkness. I found them in a narrow corridor between towering shelves of frozen goods. 2 of Voss's men were down, and the Peregrine team was providing covering fire. Rook was leaning against a pallet of frozen fish, his face pale, his left arm soaked in blood. Mateo appeared from the shadows behind me, his face a thunderous mask of fury. He must have been in a secondary vehicle, closer than I thought. I told you to stay outside, he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. I didn't flinch. I was already kneeling beside Rook, cutting away his sleeve. A deep gash ran along his forearm, bleeding profusely. And I'm telling you that your best man is about to bleed out, I shot back, my voice cold and steady. Unless you need me alive to patch up your people, I suggest you let me work. The look on Mateo's face shifted from rage to stunned silence. Our eyes locked for a single, charged second. In the midst of chaos, a new understanding was forged. My hands were sure and steady as I applied a pressure dressing, my movements economical and precise. While I worked, Mateo and the others laid down suppressing fire, grabbing the Atlas node, a small, featureless black box, and shoving it into a nondescript cat carrier one of the men was holding. Suddenly, the entire facility was bathed in strobing emergency lights. A deafening alarm blared, echoing off the metal walls. Voss tripped the main alarm, one of the team yelled. He's locked down the whole pier. We ran. We sprinted through the maze of corridors, the alarm screaming at our heels. We burst out a service door onto the docks, only to see heavy steel gates slamming shut at the main exit, trapping us. Mateo didn't hesitate. He pointed to a small, powerful-looking motorboat tied to the dock. Go now. We piled in, and Mateo gunned the engine, the boat lurching away from the pier. He aimed the bow directly at a section of floating security fence that separated the private dock from the main channel. Hold on, he yelled over the roar of the engine. There was a sickening crunch of splintering wood and screeching metal as we plowed through the barrier. For a moment, I thought we were going to sink, but the boat held, and we were through. Speeding out into the open water of the harbor, behind us, the sky erupted as someone Voss's men or the arriving police fired a series of signal flares. We escaped into the darkness under a brief, silent rain of falling red light. The aftermath was tense. We regrouped at a disused warehouse that smelled of dust and old machinery, while I properly cleaned and sutured Rook's arm, earning a quiet, grateful nod from the stoic man. Matteo got the report. Voss knew an insider had helped them bypass the thermal grid, and he had a description, a vet tech with short hair. A substantial reward was being offered for my capture. Matteo's face hardened into granite. He turned to his men. From this moment on, Tamsin Row is priority 0. Nothing is more important. Is that understood? The men responded with a chorus of grim, determined nods. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically. All I wanted was to collapse in my anonymous hotel bed, but some stubborn, defiant part of me needed to see my home. I had Rook drop me off a block away from my old apartment building. I walked up the familiar steps, my hand reaching for a key I no longer had, but I stopped dead. The cheap, flimsy lock Gable had installed was gone. In its place was a heavy-duty, high-security deadbolt. A strip of gray maintenance tape was stretched across the door frame. On it, in clean, block letters, were the words Arcturus Maintenance. A brand-new set of keys was hanging from the doorknob. He had broken into my apartment. He had invaded my space, my one last sanctuary. Without my permission, the fact that he'd done it to make it safer didn't matter. The violation was a burning, acid thing in my gut. This wasn't protection. This was possession. I pulled out my phone, my fingers stabbing at the screen as I dialed the number he'd given me for emergencies. He answered on the first ring. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I screamed into the phone, not caring who heard me. "You can't just break into my apartment and change the locks. You have no right." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of wind, as if he were standing outside. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, quiet, and utterly devastating. "I sleep better," he said softly, "knowing your door is secure." Then he hung up, leaving me standing in the hallway, speechless, trembling with a volatile cocktail of rage, fear, and a terrifying, unwelcome flicker of gratitude. I slept in my own bed for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The new lock on the door felt less like a violation and more like a statement, a heavy, metallic, and deeply unsettling statement. I woke up not to the fear of eviction, but to a new, more complicated kind of dread. I was no longer just a tenant fighting a corporation. I was an asset in a war I didn't understand, being protected by a man whose motives were as murky as the Ravenport River. That morning at the station, I worked with a cold, focused fury. I was sterilizing surgical instruments when Matteo walked in, moving with that silent, predatory grace that always set my nerves on edge. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. "I'm busy," I replied, not looking up from the autoclave. "About your door." I slammed the metal door shut, the clang echoing in the quiet room. I turned to face him, my hands on my hips. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your point. You own the lock, so you think you own me." Message received. "I don't own you, Tamsin," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I'm keeping you alive." "That's not good enough," I shot back, taking a step toward him. "You want to help, you want to be this. Dark night for the downtrodden. Then do it right. A 30-day stay is just a bandage. Voss and Harbor Line will be back the second the FDs looks the other way. You want to make a real difference, then stop acting in the shadows. Stop making me your secret project." He raised an eyebrow, a silent invitation to continue. "I want a community covenant," I said, the words tumbling out, fueled by a night of restless thinking. "A legally binding agreement, not with me. With the residents of Pier Line, I want a fund established for building repairs, a permanent freeze on rent hikes, and a free veterinary clinic sponsored by the Arcturus Foundation. And I want you to sign it, in public, where everyone can see. It was a reckless, insane demand. I was asking a man who thrived in the shadows to step into the brightest, most unforgiving spotlight imaginable. I expected him to laugh, to refuse, to tell me I was a naive fool. Instead, he was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes studying my face, searching for something. "Where?" he asked finally. "St. Virio's Church," I said, my heart hammering. "It's neutral ground. It's a local landmark. No one would dare start trouble there." "They would," he said with absolute certainty. "But they won't. I'll have my lawyer draft the documents. Be ready Saturday at dusk." Saturday arrived with a nervous energy that crackled through the entire neighborhood. The signing of the Pier Line Covenant turned into something more than a legal ceremony. It became a block party, a defiant celebration of community. Someone set up a grill, and the smell of hot dogs mingled with the scent of old stone from the church. I found my place easily, gathering a group of kids and showing them how to gently handle a litter of stray kittens we'd rescued that morning. I demonstrated how to check their ears for mites and how to coax them into eating. For a few hours, I wasn't the girl who got the mob boss to help. I was just Tamsin, the animal lady. I watched Matteo from across the makeshift festival. He looked profoundly out of place, a wolf at a petting zoo. Yet he wasn't hiding. He was manning a portable camp stove, brewing pot after pot of strong, black coffee in an old percolator, handing out steaming cups to my neighbors, Mrs. Garcia from 3B, who was terrified of her own shadow, even laughed at something he said. He looked normal. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Agent Vole appeared at my elbow, a ghost in his rumpled suit. "Quite the spectacle," he murmured, watching Matteo hand a cup of coffee to a teenager. "It's called community," I said, a little defensively. "Is it?" Vol's tired eyes met mine. "Or is it called leverage?" He nodded toward Matteo. "You should be careful. Miss Rowe, you've made him do something I've never seen him do before. You're making him wear his heart on the outside of his armor. In this city, that's how you get it shot off." He melted back into the crowd as silently as he had appeared. Later, as the party was winding down, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a photo, a grainy, zoomed-in shot of me, standing at the window of the spin cycle laundromat, my face pale and desperate in the neon glare. It had been taken the night I met Matteo. Beneath the photo was a single line of text: "Stay quiet and you'll stay safe." A cold snake of fear coiled in my stomach. I looked around, my eyes scanning the thinning crowd. Anyone could have sent it. Matteo was suddenly beside me, his presence a shield. He must have seen the look on my face. "What is it?" I showed him the phone. His expression hardened, the brief flicker of normalcy from earlier completely extinguished, replaced by a cold, lethal fury. "That's it," he said, his voice low and final. "I'm getting you out of the city for a few days, until I can find the source of this." "No," I said, shaking my head, my fear solidifying into resolve. "Absolutely not. Don't you see, that's what they want. They want me to be scared. They want me to run." I looked at Mrs. Garcia, who was packing up her folding chair, a small, genuine smile on her face for the first time in months. "If I run, the whole neighborhood learns how to run. I'm staying." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew I was right. "Then you're not leaving my sight," he said. "It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact." That night, after the last of the residents had gone home and the deli was dark and quiet, we found ourselves in the kitchen. The air smelled of yeast and spices. Without a word, we began to clean up, moving around each other in an easy, unspoken rhythm. I started chopping leftover vegetables for a soup, and he began washing the large pots from the party. "Here," he said, his voice startling me in the quiet. He was holding one of the deli's clean white aprons. I turned, and he moved behind me to tie it. His movements were methodical, impersonal, But as he looped the strings around my waist, his fingers brushed against the small of my back. It was the lightest of touches, a whisper of contact through the thin fabric of my shirt. But a jolt of pure electricity shot through me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't pull away, and he let his hand linger for a fraction of a second too long before stepping back. We worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic chop of my knife and the soft scrub of the sponge in the sink. "My father was a builder," he said suddenly, his back still to me. "He built half the original warehouses on this pier. He was a good man, but a reckless one. He cut corners on a contract to save a friend from financial ruin. The scaffolding collapsed. 3 men died." He paused, his hands stilling in the soapy water. "My mother was visiting the site that day. She was one of them. I was 10. I learned early that good intentions can build coffins just as easily as they can build houses." The confession hung in the air, a raw, unvarnished piece of his soul. I stopped chopping, my own secrets rising to the surface. "When I was a senior in high school," I said, my voice quiet, "I was offered a full academic scholarship to Cornell's pre-vet program. It was my dream, everything I'd ever worked for." I stared at the cutting board, at the neat pile of carrots. The week before I had to accept, the local animal shelter had a distemper outbreak. They were underfunded, overwhelmed. They were going to have to euthanize all 40 dogs. I deferred my acceptance for a year to volunteer. I lived at that shelter. I slept on a cot in the office. We only lost 3 dogs. "Did you ever get to Cornell?" he asked, turning to face me, his hands dripping water onto the floor. "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "By the time the next year rolled around, the money was gone. I ended up at the community college here in Ravenport. I don't regret it." We stood there, separated by the butcher block island, the air thick with our shared histories of loss and sacrifice. He saw me, not as a project, not as a witness, not as an asset. He saw me as a person who understood that some things were more important than your own dreams. He slowly walked around the island until he was standing in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He didn't touch me, he just looked at me, his dark eyes filled with a terrifying, profound understanding. He tilted his head slightly, a silent question. "May I?" My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I knew this was a line we shouldn't cross. I knew he was dangerous. I knew this would only end in heartbreak or something far worse. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the man in front of me, the man who made my door safe, the man who listened when I whispered my pain to a window pane. I gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. He moved slowly, giving me every chance to retreat. He lifted a hand and cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking my jawline. His touch was surprisingly gentle, hesitant. Then he leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. The kiss wasn't fiery or demanding. It was slow and deep and searching, a conversation without words. It tasted of coffee and regret and a desperate, shared loneliness. My hands came up, not to push him away, but to grip the edge of the wooden island, anchoring myself as the world tilted beneath my feet. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I could feel the tremor in his hand. Still holding my face, the trust we had just built was a fragile, delicate thing. We both knew that to push for more, to move too fast, would shatter it completely. "We should go slow," I whispered, the words shaky. "Slow," he agreed, his voice a ragged murmur against my skin. He stepped back, putting a careful, deliberate space between us, and the cold air of the kitchen rushed in to fill the void. The kiss in the deli kitchen created a new kind of silence between us. It was a fragile, humming quiet, filled with unspoken questions. The agreement to go slow was a map for a territory neither of us knew how to navigate. For the next 2 days, we worked. I managed the clinic. He managed his empire. And we orbited each other like wary celestial bodies, bound by a gravity we didn't dare test. On the 3rd day, The sky opened up. A steady, gray rain began to fall, washing the grime from the city streets and mirroring the somber mood that had settled over me. He found me at the end of my shift, standing by the clinic window, watching the raindrops trace paths down the glass. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't an order, but an invitation. We drove in his quiet, unassuming car, the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers a hypnotic counterpoint to the frantic beating of my heart. We left the familiar grid of the Port District, heading toward the greener, older part of the city, where the houses were set back from the road and the trees grew thick and tall. He pulled into a long, gravel driveway that led to a sprawling, beautiful structure made of glass and wrought iron. "The Hespera Greenhouse," he said, cutting the engine. "Another Arcturus project. We grow medicinal herbs for the clinic's remedies here, and some things just for peace." Inside, the world transformed. The sound of the rain was a gentle, constant drumming on the glass roof, a soothing percussion that shut out the rest of the city. The air was warm and humid, thick with the intoxicating scents of damp earth, mint, lavender, and a dozen other herbs I couldn't immediately name. It was a cathedral of green, a living, breathing sanctuary. We walked in silence down a narrow path between raised beds of fragrant plants. My shoulders, which had been permanently tensed for weeks, began to relax. "Every memory has a scent," I said quietly, running my fingers over a sprig of rosemary. "For me, the strongest one is the smell of antiseptic powder and wet wool. From a flock of sheep I helped save from a flash flood one spring. It smells like exhaustion and triumph." He stopped beside a bed of night-blooming jasmine, its white flowers tightly closed, waiting for dusk. "Old leather from my father's Cadillac," he said, his voice a low murmur. "And jasmine. My mother grew it in a pot on our windowsill. She said it was the only thing that could make a city apartment smell like a garden." He looked at the closed blossoms. "Some days, I can almost still smell it." We were sharing more than just stories of our pasts. We were exchanging the very essence of them, the sensory data that bypasses the brain and goes straight to the heart. It was more intimate than the kiss, more revealing than his confession in the kitchen, and it terrified me. I stopped and turned to face him, the rain drumming a steady rhythm above us. "Matteo, I can't do this." His brow furrowed. "Do what?" "This," I said, gesturing vaguely at the space between us. "This thing. I can't be a project. I can't be another one of your acquisitions, another piece of property you protect. I won't be owned." The words hung in the humid air, my deepest fear laid bare. I expected him to get angry, to retreat behind his cold, impassive mask. Instead, a look of profound, aching sadness crossed his face. He took a step closer, his hands still at his sides. "Tamsin," he said, and the way he spoke my name made my knees feel weak. "Look at me. You are not an investment. You are not an asset." He paused, searching for the right words. "You are the one who keeps me balanced. Before you, my world was orderly. It was violent and it was ugly, but it made a certain kind of sense. You walked in, whispering about regret, and you knocked the whole thing off its axis. You're the ballast, Tamsin, the thing that keeps the ship from capsizing in the storm." His honesty was a blow. Stripping away my defenses, he wasn't trying to possess me. He was admitting he needed me. For a man like Matteo Navar, that admission was a greater vulnerability than any scar. The rain began to fall harder, and his coat was soaked through. "Let's get out of this," he said, gesturing to a small potting shed at the far end of the greenhouse. Inside, it was rustic and clean, smelling of cedar and fresh soil. He shrugged off his heavy, wet raincoat, and I saw it. On the dark fabric of his t-shirt, high on his left shoulder, was the faint outline of a scar. But as he turned to hang the coat, the shirt pulled taut, revealing the full extent of the mark on his skin beneath. It was an old wound, a puckered, silvered slash that could only have been made by a long, sharp blade. It was a piece of the violence he lived in, permanently etched onto his body. He turned back and saw where I was looking. He didn't try to hide it. He just stood there, waiting. I stepped forward, my heart in my throat. I lifted my hand slowly, giving him time to stop me. He didn't move. I laid my palm flat against the scar, my fingers spread over the damaged skin. It was just a scar, long healed, but I could feel the heat of his body, the life force thrumming just beneath the surface. It was the touch of a healer, not a lover, an instinct to soothe a wound no one else was allowed to see. "Does it still hurt?" I whispered. The question was not about the flesh. He didn't answer with words. He took my hand, the one that was covering his scar, and gently pulled it away. He brought it down to the center of his chest, pressing my palm flat against his heart. And I felt it, a wild, frantic, powerful beating. Thump, 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 thump. It was the frantic, terrified rhythm of a captured bird, the powerful, surging rhythm of a war drum. It was his truth, spoken in a language older and more honest than words. It was the answer to my question. Yes. He was still holding my hand against his chest, his other hand coming up to cup my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. The distance between us evaporated. This was no longer about going slow. This was about a gravitational pull that had become too strong to resist. He lowered his head, and I met him, rising on my toes to press my lips against his. The kiss was nothing like the first. It was a storm, a release of all the tension and fear and desperate, unspoken longing that had been building between us. It was deep and hungry, a claiming. His hand slid from my cheek to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my short hair, holding me, supporting me. It wasn't a gesture of control, but of safety. "I have you. You won't fall." I responded by pressing closer, my hands sliding up his chest to circle his neck, pulling him down to me. He walked me backward until my back was pressed against the cool, damp glass of the greenhouse wall. The shock of the cold against my heated skin made me gasp, and he took the opportunity to deepen the kiss, his mouth exploring mine with a possessive, reverent intensity. The world dissolved into a blur of sensation, the taste of rain on his lips, the scent of lavender and damp earth, the solid, unyielding strength of his body against mine, and the constant drumming rhythm of the rain on the glass. A frantic heartbeat for the world we had created in this small, hidden place. And then, as suddenly as it began, the rain stopped. The percussive drumming on the roof ceased, replaced by a profound, dripping silence. The spell was broken. We pulled apart, slowly, reluctantly. He rested his forehead against mine, and we stood there, breathing each other's air, our chests rising and falling in perfect sync. A shy, breathless smile touched my lips, and I saw an answering flicker in his eyes. It was a silent acknowledgement. We had crossed the line. There was no going back. As we walked toward the exit, my legs still feeling unsteady, he stopped by a workbench where small, handcrafted items were displayed for sale to benefit the foundation. He picked up a simple string of wooden beads. They were a dark, purplish brown, carved with intricate, swirling patterns, and they smelled faintly of vanilla and cherries. "Heliotrope," he said, his voice a little rough. "They call it the stone of the sun. The ancient Greeks believed it could make the wearer invisible." He placed the string in my palm and closed my fingers around it. "Not to make you disappear," he said, his dark eyes holding mine, "but to remind you to keep yourself grounded, to remember who you are, Tamsin, no matter what." It wasn't a diamond bracelet or an expensive piece of jewelry. It was something far more valuable. It was a piece of his peace, a promise of his protection, and a plea for me to remain myself. I clutched the beads in my hand as we walked out into the clean, rain-washed air. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. I felt safe. And across the street, hidden in the dense foliage of an overgrown oak tree, a tiny, dark lens adjusted its focus. It captured our images as we emerged from the greenhouse, a silent, digital predator that had seen everything, recording our moment of sanctuary for the storm that was to come. The fragile peace we found in the greenhouse lasted less than 24 hours. The world, with all its sharp edges and hidden cameras, came rushing back in the form of a summons from Agent Vol. We met him in the back booth of the Peregrine Deli. The place felt less like a haven now and more like a war room. Vol looked even more haggard than before, his tie askew, his eyes bloodshot. He slid a folder across the table. It was filled with legal documents, dense paragraphs of impenetrable jargon. "The Atlas node gave us a treasure trove," Vol said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Financial trails, encrypted communications. It's enough to indict Voss on a dozen counts, but the data is circumstantial. It needs a human face, a narrative. We need a witness to testify about Harbor Line's strong-arm tactics, about the campaign of intimidation to force residents out." His tired eyes landed on me. "We need you, Miss Rowe." My heart sank. He wanted to put me on a stage, to make me the public face of this fight. The anonymous text message, the photo of me at the laundromat, flashed in my mind. "Stay quiet and you'll stay safe." "No," Matteo said, his voice flat and absolute. "She's done enough. You have the data I gave you. Use it." "It's not that simple, Navarre," Vol countered. "Voss's lawyers will tear the data apart, claim it was obtained illegally, that it's a fabrication from a business rival. We need a story a jury can understand, a victim they can root for." They were talking about me as if I wasn't there. Two kings moving a pawn across a chessboard, but the woman who had been a pawn was gone. In her place was someone who understood leverage. "I'll do it," I said. Both men turned to look at me, surprised. Matteo's expression was a thundercloud of disapproval. "I'll do it on one condition," I continued, my voice steady, my gaze fixed on Agent Vol. "I don't want a backroom deal or a verbal promise. I want a federal protection order. Not for me. For the Pier Line community, a legally binding, permanent injunction against any coercive buyouts or evictions related to this case, signed by a judge, effective the moment I take the stand. You want my story. You guarantee their homes." Vol stared at me, a slow, grudging respect dawning in his eyes. He glanced at Matteo, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. It was a mixture of fierce pride and profound fear. "You're learning," Vol grunted. He closed the folder. "I'll get you your deal." The Ravenport City Council hearing was held in a grand, wood-paneled room that felt 100 years old. It was packed. Reporters from the Ravenport Gazette lined the walls, their cameras flashing. My neighbors from Pier Line filled the public seating, their anxious faces turned toward me. I sat at a long table, a single microphone in front of me, with Agent Vol on one side and an FDS lawyer on the other. When it was my turn to speak, I pushed aside the prepared statement the lawyer had written for me. I looked out at Mrs. Garcia, at the young couple with a new baby from 2A, at all the people whose lives hung in the balance, and I just told the truth. I spoke about the leaking pipes and the broken heaters. I spoke about Gable's oily threats and the enforcer he'd sent to the laundromat. I spoke about the illegal padlock and the fear that Harbor Line used as its primary currency. I kept my voice clear and even. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply laid out the facts. My testimony a cold, sharp indictment of Declan Voss's invisible, brutal war against the poor. The next day, my face was on the front page of the Gazette. The story was a spark. For the first time, the city was paying attention. And then Voss fired back. It started as a trickle on social media, then became a flood. An anonymous blog post appeared titled "The Truth About Tamsin Row." It featured professionally doctored bank statements showing large, regular deposits into an offshore account in my name. There were falsified emails between me and a shell corporation linked to the Navarre Consortium. The narrative was simple and poisonous. I wasn't a brave tenant. I was a paid corporate saboteur, a pawn in a mob war. hired by Matteo Navar to smear a legitimate businessman. They even used a photo, a candid, smiling shot of me, talking to Matteo at the St. Virio's block party, twisted to look like a clandestine exchange. The public narrative shifted overnight. I went from a hero to a fraud. My neighbors looked at me with confusion and doubt. The reporters who had been so friendly were now sharks circling, sensing blood in the water. I found Matteo in the back of the deli, staring at a printout of the blog post, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "Reputation is a harder thing to heal than a wound," he said, his voice a low growl. "Voss knows that." "We have to fight back," I said, my voice trembling with a helpless rage. "We have to tell them it's a lie." "How?" he shot back, his eyes blazing. "We show them your real bank statements. A struggling vet tech's finances versus a billionaire's perfectly crafted fiction. They won't believe us. The only way to prove you weren't on my payroll is to prove why you were helping me." The unspoken words hung between us, the Atlas node. "If I give the FDS the original drive," he said, thinking aloud, his voice strained, "it proves you weren't a paid operative. It proves you were helping a federal investigation. It clears your name instantly." "But it exposes you," I whispered, the full weight of his dilemma crashing down on me. "The drive doesn't just have Voss's data, it has your secrets too, doesn't it?" He didn't answer, and he didn't have to. The Atlas node was his leverage, his proof of cooperation, his get-out-of-jail-free card with the feds. To use it now, just to save my reputation, would be to throw away his most powerful weapon. He looked at me, at the shame and fear in my eyes, and his decision was made. He picked up his phone. "Vol, I'm releasing the Atlas node, all of it, in exchange. I want a public press conference from your office clearing Tamsin Rowe's name. And I want an expanded witness protection detail on her. A full 24/7 team. Voss is going to get desperate." He was sacrificing his advantage. For me. Matteo was right. Voss got desperate. That evening, as I was leaving the clinic, a woman who looked strikingly like me, same short brown hair, same build, wearing a similar coat, walked out just ahead of me and headed in the opposite direction. A dark van screeched to a halt beside her, and two men jumped out, grabbing her and pulling her inside before speeding off. It was over in seconds. It was Agent Vol's decoy, a flawlessly executed kidnapping of a fake Tamsin Rowe, designed to make Voss think he had his leverage. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over me. The decoy had worked. And then my phone rang. It was Mireille, her voice a panicked sob. "Tamsin, the station. Someone threw something through the window. It's on fire." Voss's second plan, his real plan. He hadn't just targeted me. He had targeted my heart. Matteo and I got there at the same time, our cars screeching to a halt as the first fire engine arrived. Flames were already licking at the windows of the intake room. The smell of smoke and burning plastic was thick in the air. The sound of terrified, trapped animals was a knife in my soul. "No!" I screamed, starting for the door. Matteo grabbed my arm, his grip like steel. "The firefighters are here. Let them do their job." "They'll save the building. They won't save the animals." I twisted out of his grasp, my mind shutting down, my training taking over. Triage, evacuate, save who you can. I grabbed a wet towel from an emergency kit in my car, wrapped it around my face, and ran inside. The smoke was thick and acrid, stinging my eyes. I could hear the panicked howls and meows from the main kennel. I started kicking open doors, grabbing terrified cats and dogs, carrying them out into the night air. A second later, Matteo was beside me, his face grim, a wet jacket wrapped around his own head. We worked in a desperate, frantic rhythm. He would smash open a stuck cage door, and I would coax the terrified animal out. We became a machine of rescue, moving through the smoke-filled rooms, our only purpose to get every living creature out. We didn't know that a news van, drawn by the initial kidnapping report, had arrived and was filming the whole thing. Their cameras captured the chaos, the raging fire. The so-called corporate saboteur and the notorious Mafia boss, covered in soot, risking their lives again and again to carry coughing, whimpering animals to safety. We got the last one out, the terrified pit bull I had calmed a week before, just as a section of the roof collapsed with a deafening roar. I fell to my knees on the wet pavement, coughing, clutching the dog, surrounded by a small, chaotic island of rescued life. Matteo stood over me, his hands on his knees, breathing heavily, his silhouette stark against the flames. He looked at the news cameras, then at the fire, then at me, huddled on the ground with his rescued animals. And I saw a new understanding dawn in his eyes. He realized that fighting Voss in the shadows, with secret data and backroom deals, was never going to be enough. Voss's power came from his public image, his carefully constructed facade of legitimacy. To kill a monster like that, you couldn't just stab it in the dark. You had to drag it into the sunlight and show the whole world what it really was. "This ends," he said, his voice a low, ragged promise. Not to me, but to the burning building and the city beyond. But not like this. We're going to bid on Dry Dock 19. We're going to propose a plan to turn it into a community hub. We're going to beat him in the open. We're going to take everything. The fire at the Arcturus station was a declaration of war, and Matteo answered it not with a whisper, but with a roar. The very next morning, the Navarre Consortium, in a move that stunned the city, submitted a formal public proposal to the Ravenport City Council, the plan to acquire the derelict Dry Dock 19 and its surrounding properties, not for industrial use, but to redevelop them into the Pier Line Community Hub, a sprawling complex featuring low-income housing, a new state-of-the-art Arcturus Animal Hospital, and vocational training facilities. It was a brilliant, audacious move. He had taken Voss's greatest ambition and turned it into a public referendum on the soul of the city. The story of the fire, complete with photos of us covered in soot and saving animals, had gone viral. Public opinion, which had been so easily poisoned against me, swung back with a vengeance. We were no longer a mobster and his shill. We were David, and Declan Voss, the beloved tech mogul, was suddenly cast in the role of a Goliath who burned down animal shelters. Voss was forced to play his hand. He couldn't let the proposal gain traction. His shell corporations began a frantic campaign of lobbying and backroom deals with council members, a flurry of activity that was clumsy, desperate, and, for Agent Vol, a trail of breadcrumbs he could follow all the way home. Voss was exposed, and he knew it. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. I was being transported from the hotel to a secure FDS safe house, with Rook driving and another of Matteo's men in the passenger seat. Matteo was following in a separate car. It was a standard protection detail, a routine I was becoming grimly accustomed to. We were crossing the Larkspan, an old industrial bridge that arched over the freight train lines. When it happened, a black sedan shot out from a side street, slamming into our rear quarter panel, sending the car into a sickening spin. Before Rook could regain control, a heavy-duty truck that had been patiently tailing us surged forward, its massive grille filling the rear window. We were boxed in. "Hold on!" Rook yelled, wrenching the wheel. The world became a chaotic symphony of screeching tires and shattering glass. The truck hit us again, a brutal, bone-jarring impact that shoved us toward the bridge's railing, through the spiderweb cracks of the windshield. I saw men with the cold, dead eyes of sable crown emerging from the sedan, their purpose unmistakable. Suddenly, Matteo's car was there, a black streak of motion. He didn't try to flank them. He drove his own vehicle directly into the path of the truck, a suicidal move that served as a battering ram and a shield. The impact was deafening. He had bought us seconds. My door was wrenched open. It was Matteo, his face a mask of cold fury, a small cut bleeding freely on his forehead. Tamsin, out now. He didn't pull me out of the car. He pulled me through it, dragging me over the center console and out Rook's driver's side door. Rook was already out, returning fire, providing cover. "The tracks!" Matteo yelled over the gunfire. "Go!" He half threw me over the railing. It was a 12-foot drop to the gravel bed of the train tracks below. I landed badly, my ankle twisting, a sharp, searing pain shooting up my leg. Matteo was beside me a second later, landing with a cat-like grace. He hauled me to my feet. "Can you run?" "I have to," I gasped, leaning on him as we scrambled down the embankment. Behind us, I could hear the sounds of the gunfight fading, replaced by the shouts of our pursuers as they swarmed over the railing after us. We were exposed, running along the tracks as a light rain began to fall. A train horn blared, deafeningly close. A freight train was rumbling toward us, its single bright eye cutting through the gloom. For a terrifying moment, I thought we were trapped. "It's him!" Matteo yelled, pointing. In the lighted cabin, I could see Rook's severe profile. He had somehow gotten ahead of us and commandeered the train. He was slowing, but not stopping. As the long, flatbed cars began to pass us, Matteo matched their speed. "We have to climb," he shouted. "On my mark, grab my hand." He locked his fingers with mine, his grip painfully tight. Now. We ran together, a single entity, and leaped. My good foot found purchase on a metal ladder, and Matteo's strength was the only thing that kept me from falling as he shoved me up onto the car. I scrambled onto the cold, wet wood of the flatbed, then turned and helped him up. We lay there, chests heaving, the train carrying us away into the darkness. But we weren't safe. A figure landed on the back of our car, having made the same desperate jump. It was one of Sable Crown's men, his face contorted in a grimace of victory. He raised his weapon. There was no time to think. Matteo was moving to intercept him, but he was too far away. I scrambled backward, my hand fumbling in the vet kit that was still, miraculously, slung over my shoulder. My fingers closed around a plastic squeeze bottle, isopropyl alcohol, a powerful antiseptic, and a powerful irritant. As the man advanced, I squeezed the bottle with all my might, sending a high-pressure stream of alcohol directly into his eyes. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony, dropping his weapon to claw at his burning face. In that single, vital moment of distraction, Matteo was on him, a silent shadow of retribution. There was a brief, brutal struggle, ending with a clean, efficient takedown that left the man unconscious and securely bound with his own belt. The train rumbled on, carrying us away from the city lights. Rook eventually brought it to a halt near a cluster of old, abandoned grain silos that stood like silent sentinels in the rain-swept countryside. We took refuge in one, the air thick with the smell of dust and the ghosts of long-forgotten harvests. The adrenaline wore off, and the cold set in, a deep, penetrating chill that made my teeth chatter. My ankle throbbed with a dull, insistent pain. I was shaking, not from fear anymore, but from shock and cold. Matteo saw me shivering. He took off his heavy, warm jacket, the one he'd used as a shield against the fire, and draped it over my shoulders. The scent of him, of smoke and rain and something uniquely his, enveloped me. He sat close to me, our shoulders touching, and began to chafe my arms, his hands firm and surprisingly gentle, bringing a tingling warmth back to my frozen limbs. We sat in silence, listening to the rain drumming on the metal roof. "I'm sorry, Tamsin," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet space. "I never should have let you get this close to my world." "It's a little late for that, don't you think?" I whispered, leaning my head against his shoulder, too exhausted to pretend I was fine. "Besides, you're pretty deep in my world, too, the one with stray cats and community meetings." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep trying to find a safe place for you," he murmured, his breath warm against my hair, "a place where no one can touch you." "There is no place like that," I said, a wave of despair washing over me. "Not anymore." He gently took my hand, turning it palm up. He traced the lines with his finger, his touch sending a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "Yes, there is," he said, his gaze intense and unwavering as he tapped the center of my palm. "Here, in what you do, in who you are. Your compassion, your stubbornness, that's the one place Voss can never get to, the one thing he can never own. His phone vibrated, a harsh, intrusive sound. He answered, his entire demeanor shifting back to the cold, hard commander. "What is it?" He listened, his jaw tightening into a line of granite. Understood." He hung up, the silence in the silo suddenly heavy and suffocating. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I already knew it was bad news. "That was Rook," he said, his voice flat. "Gable just finalized the sale of Harbor Line's Pier Line assets. He sold them to a shell company, Grey Rook LLC. It's one of Voss's. The sale agreement supersedes our 30-day stay. The new eviction date is effective immediately. We have 72 hours. The air left my lungs. 72 hours. All our work, the public hearing, the covenant. It was all about to be wiped away. "It's over," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. "No," he said, his voice a blade of steel. He stood up, pulling me with him. "It's not over. It's just entered the final act." He pulled out his phone again, dialing a different number. "Activate Lex Crows," he said into the phone, using a name I didn't recognize. "I need a blanket injunction filed against Grey Rook LLC on behalf of every resident of Pier Line. I don't care what it takes. Tie them up in court for the next decade if you have to." He ended the call and immediately dialed another. "Vol, it's time. Greenlight Keen Tide. Release everything. The entire unredacted Atlas node. Give it to the Gazette. Give it to the networks. Give it to every blogger with a pulse. Burn him to the ground." A storm was coming. A media firestorm that would engulf the entire city. Matteo had finally unleashed his nuclear option, not just to save me, but to save my home. He looked at me, the faint light from his phone illuminating the fierce determination in his eyes. "You did this, you know," he said softly. "You dragged this whole city, kicking and screaming, toward the light." I shook my head, my fingers clutching the warm fabric of his jacket. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just brought the truth out into the sun." The data from the Atlas node hit the city like a tidal wave. The Ravenport Gazette ran a banner headline that screamed, "The Voss Web," with articles detailing the intricate network of shell corporations, money laundering, and illegal data trafficking. The emergency city council meeting to vote on the Dry Dock 19 proposal was set for the following evening. The city was a powder keg, and I was standing right at the center of it, a reluctant symbol of a revolution I had never intended to start. I was at the FDS safe house, a sterile apartment with bulletproof windows and a revolving team of grim-faced agents. It should have felt safe, but it felt like a cage. My phone, a clean burner given to me by Vol, buzzed with a text from an untraceable number. My heart leaped into my throat, expecting another threat from Voss, but the message was different. "They're here, the Westrel Lighthouse Museum, a whole litter, locked in a maintenance closet. The mother was hit by a car. They're starving. Please, no one else will help." I stared at the words, my blood running cold. The Westrel Lighthouse Museum was a derelict tourist trap at the far end of the old pier, abandoned for years. It was the perfect place for a trap. I knew it. Every rational part of my brain screamed that it was a lie, a lure designed to pull me out into the open. But the image of starving kittens, alone in the dark, it was a hook designed specifically for my heart, and it sank in deep. I couldn't call Matteo. He would forbid me from going, and we would fight, and time would be wasted. I couldn't call Vol, because he would lock me in this room and I'd never know for sure, the tiny, desperate possibility that it was real, that living creatures were suffering because of this war, was a weight I couldn't bear. Thinking I was being clever, I told the agent stationed outside my door that I was feeling ill and needed some fresh air on the secured balcony. Once he was gone, I slipped out the service entrance. I would go, check it out, and be back in 20 minutes. If it was real, I would call for backup. If it was a trap, I would run. It was a stupid, reckless plan born of compassion and arrogance. The museum was even more desolate than I'd imagined. A skeleton of a building against the bruised purple sky of dusk. The air smelled of salt, rust, and decay. The front door was ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the cavernous space, filled with dusty display cases of maritime artifacts. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me with a deafening boom. Figures emerged from the shadows, sable crown, and at their head was a man with a brutish, powerful build and a flat, pitiless face. This had to be their leader. "The little vet tech," he grunted, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Voss said you couldn't resist a stray." They surrounded me, and my foolish, stupid hope died, replaced by the cold, metallic taste of fear. The next thing I knew, I was on my knees in the main rotunda, my wrists bound in front of me with a thick nylon zip tie. The leader, whom his men called Mastiff, held a phone up, its camera pointed at my face. On the screen, I could see Matteo, his face a stone mask, in what looked like the back room of the deli. "Here's the situation, Navarre," Mastiff said, his voice a low growl. "Your little girlfriend is here with us. The city council votes in 1 hour. You will call your pet agent at the FDES and retract the Atlas node data. You will publicly withdraw your bid for Dry Dock 19, and then you will come here, alone, unarmed, or the next call Agent Vol gets will be to send a coroner." I saw Matteo's jaw clench. He didn't look at Mastiff. His eyes were locked on mine through the small screen. A silent, desperate conversation passing between us. "Don't do it, Matteo," I choked out, Wenner shaking my head frantically. "Don't you dare." Mastiff ended the call. "He'll come," he said with absolute certainty. Men like him always do. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I knelt on the cold stone floor, the only light coming from the weak yellow glow of the old beacon lamp in the center of the rotunda. And then I heard the sound of the front door creaking open. Matteo stepped inside. He was alone. His hands were raised, empty. He stopped just inside the doorway, his silhouette framed against the last light of day. He slowly unbuttoned his jacket and let it fall to the floor, then did the same with the holster slung over his shoulder, letting it drop with a heavy thud. He stood before them, completely vulnerable, in just his dark t-shirt and slacks. My heart shattered. Tears of rage and terror streamed down my face. "You shouldn't have come," I whispered, the words a ragged, broken thing. "He's clean," one of the men said after patting him down. Mastiff circled Matteo like a shark. "You're a fool. Navarre, all this, for her." Matteo didn't look at Mastiff. His eyes were fixed on me, a lifeline in the terrifying darkness. "You think this is about her?" he said, his voice calm, resonant, filling the cavernous space. "This is about Mrs. Garcia in apartment 3B. Her husband died last year. Her only companion is a 15-year-old cat with a kidney condition. You want to throw her out on the street?" Mastiff hesitated, thrown off by the change in tactic. "This is about the Jensen family in 2A, Matteo continued, his voice gaining power. "They just brought their baby home from the hospital. The hospital you can see from their window. They've lived in that building their whole lives. This is about their home." He was walking slowly, deliberately, into the center of the room, his gaze never leaving mine. He was naming them, one by one. He spoke the names of the families in my building, painting a vivid picture of the lives Voss was trying to destroy. He wasn't negotiating. He was bearing witness. He was reminding these hired thugs that they weren't just following orders. They were destroying a community. I saw it then. A flicker of uncertainty in the eyes of the man holding a gun on me. A subtle shifting of weight from the man by the door. They had signed up to be muscle for a corporation, not to evict grandmothers and newborns. Mastiff saw it too. His grip on his own weapon tightened, his knuckles white. He was losing control. "Shut up," he roared, raising his gun and pointing it at Matteo's chest. "It's just business." I saw the tremor in his hand, the hesitation. In that split second, I knew I had a chance. I subtly shook my head at Matteo, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Wait. My mind was a razor. I had been working at the zip tie with the simple metal bobby pin that I'd forgotten was in my hair. My fingers, numb and clumsy. Finally felt the plastic catch give way. I didn't pull my hands free. I waited. Mastiff took a step toward Mateo, his resolve hardening. You lose, Navarre. And so does she. He shifted his aim from Mateo's chest to my head. That was the moment. As his arm moved, I surged forward from my knees, not trying to attack him, but to use my body as a lever. I slammed my shoulder into his elbow with every ounce of strength I had. The gun went off with a deafening roar, the bullet tearing a chunk of plaster from the wall far to my left. The force of the recoil, combined with my lunge, sent him staggering off balance. In the heartbeat of chaos I had created, Mateo moved. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a blur of controlled, violent grace. He disarmed Mastiff with a brutal twist of the wrist, the gun clattering across the stone floor. He used the man's own momentum to throw him to the ground, and before Mastiff could even register what had happened, Mateo had him bound and subdued with a length of thick, decorative rope from a nearby exhibit on sailors' knots. It was over in 5 seconds. And then the world exploded in light and sound. The windows of the museum shattered inward as FDS agents swarmed in from all sides, their weapons drawn, shouting commands. Agent Vol was at the front, his face grim. He knelt beside me, cutting the zip tie from my wrists. You okay, kid? I could only nod, my body trembling uncontrollably. I looked at Mateo, who was watching the agents secure the room. How did you know? I asked him, my voice shaking. He walked over to me, his face etched with a relief so profound it was painful to see. He gently touched the small, silver pin on the collar of my shirt, the Arcturus Foundation logo, a soaring bird. I put a micro-tracker in it this morning, he said softly. I told you, you weren't leaving my sight. A voice crackled over Vol's radio. We got him. Voss is in the parking lot. He was trying to wipe his phone. It was all connected. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The adrenaline fled my body, leaving behind a deep, shuddering cold. Mateo stepped forward and pulled me into his arms, crushing me against his chest. I buried my face in his shoulder, inhaling his scent, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had just tried to tear itself apart. He held me, his arms a cage of absolute safety. Nobody, he whispered into my hair, his voice rough with an emotion I had never heard from him before. Nobody is regretting losing you, Tamsin. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes, his hands framing my face. There was only me, terrified of losing you. A final, desperate shout broke the moment. Mastiff, somehow managing to get to his feet despite his bonds, was charging at Mateo, his face a mask of pure rage. Before either of us could react, a shadow moved with impossible speed. Rook was there, stepping between us and Mastiff, intercepting the charge with a single, brutally efficient move that sent the larger man crashing back to the floor, unconscious for good this time. Rook simply adjusted his suit jacket and gave Mateo a curt nod, his duty done. One of the FDS agents used the butt of his rifle to shatter the last remaining pane of glass in a large window overlooking the water. A cool, clean breeze, smelling of salt in the open sea, swept through the dusty museum, clearing the air of the scent of gunpowder and fear. It felt like the first breath after being underwater for too long. It felt like the end of the storm. The events at the museum were the final, desperate move in a chess game Declan Voss had already lost. With the unredacted Atlas node data flooding the internet and Voss in federal custody, the emergency city council vote was less a debate and more a formality, a public coronation for a battle already won. I watched the proceedings on a small television in the deli's back room, surrounded by my neighbors from Pier Line. When the chairman announced the unanimous vote to approve the Navarre Consortium's bid and to place the Pier Line properties under the protection of the newly formed Pier Line Community Trust, the room erupted in a joyous, tearful celebration. It was the sound of 100 held breaths being released at once. The following days were a whirlwind of seismic change for Ravenport. The FDES held a press conference, formally announcing the indictments against Obsidian Meridian, Sable Crown, and a dozen city officials who had been on Voss's payroll. Agent Vol, looking tired but triumphant, publicly credited the data provided by the Navarre Consortium and an anonymous but unflinchingly brave citizen witness. But the biggest shock came a day later. Mateo, in a move that no one anticipated, held a press conference of his own. He stood before a bank of microphones, not in the shadows of the deli, but in the bright, unforgiving light of day. He didn't make excuses or try to reframe his past. He apologized. He spoke of the city his father had helped build and how his own actions, born of grief and anger, had contributed to the shadows that plagued it. He announced that the Navarre Consortium was being restructured. Its legitimate logistics operations were being folded into a new public benefit corporation, Arcturus Civic Lines, with a charter to prioritize hiring from within the community. He took questions. A reporter from the Gazette asked him how the city could trust him. "You shouldn't. Not yet," Mateo answered, his voice steady. "Trust is earned. That's why I am inviting the Pierline Community Trust to form a citizen oversight committee with full, independent auditing power over all of Arcturus Civic Line's city contracts. I work for you now." He meant it, and the city, cautiously, miraculously, began to believe him. My own world began to rebuild itself from the ashes. With a massive grant from the new Arcturus Fund and an army of volunteers from the neighborhood, we rebuilt the animal station. It was bigger, brighter, and better than before. On the day we reopened, I hung a hand-carved wooden sign over the new front door. It read, "Where the small ones teach us courage." 3 months later, the dream became a reality. The grand opening of the Dry Dock 19 Community Hub was a festival of light and hope on a waterfront that had once been a symbol of decay, where a cold storage facility had once stood. There was now a sprawling complex. Kids from Pierline were playing soccer on a brand new turf field. Senior citizens were tending to planters in a community garden, and on the roof, visible to all, were the 4 neat rows of beehives I recognized from that first night. Their low, productive hum, a promise of sweetness and order. There was a free health clinic, a fully equipped veterinary hospital, and classrooms offering free vocational courses. I was standing near the new vet clinic, watching a group of teenagers learn basic animal first aid. When Mateo found me, he was wearing a simple dark polo shirt and a tool belt. Having just finished helping a crew install a new bench, he looked tired, happy, and more at peace than I had ever seen him. "I have something for you," he said, his voice quiet amidst the celebration. He handed me a flat, rectangular box. It wasn't a jewelry box. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a pair of brand-new, high-grade veterinary examination gloves, the kind I'd always dreamed of owning. They were made of supple, durable leather designed for handling large, frightened animals, and embossed in small. Silver letters on the cuff of each glove were 2 words, Roe Navarre Initiative. Tears pricked my eyes. It wasn't a diamond. It wasn't a pretty, useless trinket. It was a promise. It was a partnership. It was a testament to the work we would do together. I looked up at him, my heart too full for words. Later that evening, after the crowds had gone home and a quiet calm had settled over the new hub, we stood in the empty event space, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a glittering panorama of the city we had fought for. The work wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the war was. We stood in a comfortable silence, just breathing together, our heartbeats in sync. "Come home with me," he said, his voice a soft murmur in the quiet room. He turned to face me, his dark eyes serious, vulnerable, for good. It wasn't a question born of passion or impulse. It was a statement of fact, a final, necessary piece being slotted into a puzzle that was now complete. My answer wasn't in words. I stepped into his arms, slid my hands around his neck, and gave him my answer with a long, slow, certain kiss. When I pulled away, a playful smile touched my lips. "Just so you know," I whispered, teasing him, "if you ever drop me, I will make you regret it." A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a rare and beautiful sight. "I won't," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. He led me out onto the newly built pier, and under the soft glow of the festival lights, we danced. There was no music, save for the gentle lapping of the river and the distant hum of the city. He held me close, his hand resting securely on the small of my back, my head resting on his chest, right over his steady, beating heart. It was a dance of quiet triumph, of profound gratitude, of two broken people who had somehow, against all odds, made each other whole. I caught our reflection in the dark glass of the main building's entrance, a man and a woman, holding each other as if they were the only two people in the world. It was a lifetime away from the lonely, desperate ghost I had seen in the window of the spin cycle. That whispered curse, born of pain and loss, had become an invocation, a homing beacon that had led me here. From a distance, standing by his unmarked sedan, I saw Agent Vol watch us for a moment. A small, tired smile touched his lips. He slowly, deliberately, took the FDS pin from his lapel and slipped it into his pocket. His mission finally, truly complete. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass over the entire city of Ravenport. As we stood there, swaying gently by the water, I could almost hear the faint, contented hum of the bees on the roof above us. I thought of the veterinary gloves tucked safely in my bag, and the construction hard hat someone had left on a bench nearby. Healing and building, love and reconstruction. They weren't separate worlds after all. They were just different sides of the same beautiful, complicated, and hopeful story, our story. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to see where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below to say hello and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed our journey in Ravenport, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and consider hitting the hype button to help share it with even more listeners.